And it's very, very sad, but I have to say that the extraordinary tributes and the memories that everybody has had and been willing to share has been so fantastic, and it just goes to show
There are moments in royal history that shift everything quietly, without fanfare, without a dramatic announcement on the palace steps. No trumpets, no ceremony, just a set of legal documents, a confirmation from a team of lawyers, and suddenly the carefully constructed silence around one of Britain's most sensitive family matters is broken wide open. That is exactly what happened when Prince Edward's legal team confirmed the full details of what he has now secured: property, title, and a future that King Charles held in his hands for years and never seemed eager to release. This is not a story about gossip. It is not speculation from royal watchers with an agenda. This is a story about inheritance, about legal rights, about a father's dying wish and the son who delayed honoring it, and about a younger brother who waited, worked quietly, and ultimately walked away with more than most people realize. Once you understand the full picture, the title, the estate, the lease, and what it all means for the future of the monarchy, you will never look at the British royal family quite the same way again. To understand why this confirmation from Edward's lawyers matters so deeply, you have to go back to the beginning, not just to 1999, when Edward married Sophie Rhys-Jones and a promise was made publicly about his future title. You have to go back further than that. You have to go back to 1947, when a young naval officer named Philip Mountbatten stood beside Princess Elizabeth on their wedding day, and her father, King George VI, bestowed upon him one of the most prestigious titles in the British peerage, the Duke of Edinburgh. Philip carried that title for more than 7 decades. It was not just a name. It was a symbol of his identity, his service, his relationship to the crown, and his deep connection to Scotland and the broader British Commonwealth. When Philip passed away on April 9, 2021, the title passed automatically by tradition to his eldest son, Charles. This was expected. This was protocol. But what came next was far less straightforward than protocol usually allows. When Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022 and Charles ascended to the throne as King Charles III, the Dukedom of Edinburgh merged back into the crown. The title technically ceased to exist in the form it had held for over 70 years. And sitting in the background, watching this unfold, was Edward, the youngest of the royal siblings, who had been promised, publicly and formally, that this title was meant for him. The promise had been made back in 1999. When Edward and Sophie announced their engagement, the palace made clear that Edward would one day become the Duke of Edinburgh, as a way of carrying on his father's legacy. It was not ambiguous. It was not whispered between courtiers. It was a public statement understood by the press, the public, and the royal family alike. Yet when the moment finally arrived, when Charles wore the crown and had the power to simply say the words and make it happen, he hesitated. Months passed. The royal establishment watched. Reporters asked questions, and Charles said nothing. For nearly 6 months, the promise made in 1999 hovered in limbo. Royal commentators noted at the time that this delay was unusually long by palace standards. Decisions of this nature, when they are not contested, are typically dispatched swiftly. The prolonged silence told a story of its own. Something was being debated behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, and whatever it was not being resolved quickly. Those close to the situation have since confirmed what many suspected. King Charles had deep reservations. His vision for the monarchy, a slimmer, more focused institution, with fewer working royals carrying senior titles, sat in direct conflict with granting his younger brother one of the most historic dukedoms in British history. Charles reportedly wanted to streamline the institution, to concentrate power and prestige within the direct line of succession, not distribute it outward to branches that were further and further from the throne. Edward, by 2022, was already 15th in line. Giving him a dukedom felt, to Charles, like moving in the wrong direction. There were also political considerations that went largely undiscussed in public. At the time, Scotland's independence movement was still a significant force. The Duke of Edinburgh title carries deep symbolic ties to Scotland, and some advisors quietly raised concerns about what it would mean to give that title to someone so far removed from the direct succession, particularly at a moment when the union felt fragile. The political landscape of Britain was a factor in a decision that looked, on the surface, like a simple family matter. And then, on March 10, 2023, Edward's 59th birthday, Buckingham Palace finally announced that King Charles III had conferred the Dukedom of Edinburgh upon his younger brother. The statement said Charles was pleased to do so. One word, pleased. 6 months of silence and reluctance, years of waiting and uncertainty, and the official announcement offered a single, carefully chosen word that communicated almost nothing about the private struggle that had preceded it. What finally tipped the balance? Those familiar with the internal discussions point to several converging factors. The political risk of Scottish independence had diminished somewhat, particularly after Nicola Sturgeon stepped back from leadership. Edward and Sophie had spent years building an extraordinary record of public service that even Charles could not dismiss. And perhaps most significantly, the weight of Philip's wish, a father's clearly stated desire that his youngest son carry on his name and his work, was simply too heavy to ignore indefinitely. Charles could delay. He could not deny forever. But the title, as significant as it is, turns out to be only part of the story. The part that has truly alarmed the royal establishment, the part that has sent lawyers and palace officials scrambling, is what Edward's legal team has now confirmed about Bagshot Park. Bagshot Park is a 120-room mansion in Surrey, one of the finest residential estates in the Crown's possession. Edward and Sophie moved in during 1999, the same year they married. For more than 2 decades, it has been their primary residence, the base from which they have carried out their royal duties, raised their children, and quietly built the lives that have made them among the most respected working royals of their generation. What Edward's lawyers have now confirmed in detail is that the arrangement governing his occupation of this property is not simply a standard royal residence agreement. It is a legally binding deal with profound financial implications, and it has been sitting in the documents largely unexamined for years. The full picture of the Bagshot Park arrangement is staggering in its scope. When Edward first took possession of the property in March 1998, he did so on a 50-year lease at an annual cost of just £5,000. That figure was extraordinarily low even by the standards of the late 1990s, and the disparity between what Edward paid and what the property was worth drew no significant attention at the time. He then invested substantially in the estate, spending approximately £1.36 million on renovations, while the Crown estate itself covered a further £3 million in refurbishment costs. Following that work, the annual rent was adjusted to £90,000, still a fraction of what a commercial tenant would pay for a comparable property. Then came 2007, and the legal move that has now drawn so much scrutiny. Edward, operating through a private company called Eclipse Nominees Limited, negotiated and signed an extension to his lease. Not a modest extension. Not a decade or two. A 150-year lease, secured for a single upfront payment of £5 million, described at the time as having been market-tested. And after that payment was made, the annual rent Edward owes became what property law refers to as peppercorn rent, a nominal, essentially symbolic sum that amounts, in practical terms, to nothing. Let that settle for a moment. Edward pays peppercorn rent for a 120-room mansion set on 51 acres in Surrey, an estate valued today at approximately £30 million. He holds a lease that runs for 150 years. And what his lawyers have now confirmed, with full legal clarity, is that this lease is not merely a residential arrangement. It contains provisions that allow the lease to be sold or transferred. The only condition is that any future occupant must be able to demonstrate the financial capacity to maintain the property. Beyond that, the profits from any future sale would flow directly to Edward. This is where the story separates itself from the usual narratives about royal property. Edward does not merely have the benefit of living in a magnificent home at minimal cost. He holds a potentially valuable long-term financial asset, a transferable 150-year lease on one of the finest private estates in the home counties, and that asset now has confirmed legal status. When his lawyers confirmed the details, they confirmed not just where he lives, but what he owns and what it is worth. The contrast with his brother, Prince Andrew, is telling. Andrew's arrangement at Royal Lodge, the property he has occupied since separating from Sarah Ferguson, also involves a Crown estate lease. But the terms are fundamentally different. Andrew's lease restricts inheritance to a narrow circle: Sarah Ferguson and their daughters, Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice. He cannot sell the lease on the open market. He cannot transfer it to a party of his choosing. The financial potential of his arrangement is tightly constrained by conditions that lock the property within a specific family structure. Edward's lease carries no such restrictions. It is, by comparison, a remarkably open and flexible arrangement. He can sell it. He can transfer it. He can structure its disposal in ways that generate significant financial return. While the media spent years fixated on Andrew's various controversies and the cost of his living situation, Edward was quietly holding a far more powerful legal position, confirmed in documents that were never the subject of major public scrutiny until the parliamentary inquiry began asking questions. That inquiry, launched by the Public Accounts Committee, has cast new light on everything. Parliamentarians began asking the Crown Estate to disclose the terms of royal residential leases, and what emerged turned a low-profile legal matter into front-page news. The committee heard that before Bagshot Park was leased to Edward, the Ministry of Defense had returned the site, and two serious commercial proposals, one for a conference center, one for a hotel, had been rejected in favor of the arrangement with Edward. Critics have been pointed in their response. The Crown Estate, they argue, chose a royal family member over commercial operators who would have generated substantial public revenue, and then allowed that family member to sublet part of the property for private gain. The subletting issue is significant. Edward and Sophie have reportedly been earning income of up to £130,000 per year by renting out converted stable buildings on the Bagshot Park estate. Outbuildings located approximately 400 meters from a main house, recently offered as premium office space at over £10,000 per month. The arithmetic is straightforward and damning in the eyes of critics. Edward pays near nothing for the estate. He then rents part of it to commercial tenants. The income flows to him and Sophie, not to the Crown Estate, not to the public purse. His lawyers have confirmed this arrangement is entirely legal under the terms of his lease. That confirmation has not made it any less controversial. Palace officials have defended the structure by pointing to the £5 million premium paid in 2007, arguing that it was properly market-tested and that lump sum upfront payments are a recognized mechanism for balancing long-term lease values. Supporters note that the Crown Estate regularly enters into such arrangements and that the upfront capital payment was a reasonable commercial decision at the time. Whether that defense is convincing depends largely on how one weighs the public interest against the mechanics of historic property law. In a Britain still recovering from the economic disruptions of recent years, where the cost of living has strained millions of households, the image of a royal figure earning six figures annually from a property he essentially holds for free has not been warmly received. And yet, for all the controversy surrounding the property arrangements, there is another dimension to Edward's inheritance that the legal confirmation has made impossible to ignore, one that concerns not bricks and mortar, but the future of royal succession itself. When Charles granted Edward the dukedom of Edinburgh, he did so with a specific structural condition. The title is a life peerage. This means that when Edward dies, the dukedom does not pass to his son, James, Viscount Severn. It reverts to the crown. Charles has essentially constructed a dual outcome, honoring his father's wish while simultaneously reserving the title for eventual use within the direct line of succession. The intended heir to the dukedom, according to those familiar with palace planning, is Prince Louis, the youngest son of Prince William and Princess Catherine, and third in line to the throne. As Louis grows older, he will need a significant title, and the dukedom of Edinburgh, restored to the crown at Edward's death, will be available for William to bestow upon him. It is a long-term succession strategy disguised as a gesture of familial generosity, and it reflects exactly the kind of careful, layered planning that characterizes how Charles approaches institutional decisions. James, meanwhile, will hold the title Earl of Wessex after the dukedom reverts to the crown, a significant but lesser distinction. Edward and Sophie made a deliberate choice years ago not to give their children princely titles, preferring instead that Lady Louise Windsor and James Viscount Severn experience something closer to ordinary life. That choice, combined with the life peerage structure, means that Edward's legacy, at least in terms of title and formal rank, will pass not downward to his own children, but sideways and eventually upward toward the direct line of the throne. Whether Edward views this arrangement as a graceful accommodation or a quiet limitation is a matter of debate among those who follow the palace closely. What is clear is that he accepted it, and that his acceptance says something significant about the man he has become. Because the final dimension of this story is perhaps the most compelling, and it is the one that has received the least attention amid the legal and financial headlines. Prince Edward's transformation over the past 2 decades is remarkable by any measure. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, he was a figure of gentle ridicule. The youngest royal sibling who had abandoned the Royal Marines, struggled with a television production company, and become associated with several embarrassing incidents that put the palace on the defensive. Tabloids were not kind, and he gave them little reason to be. Today, Edward occupies a position of genuine trust within the institution. He and Sophie are among King Charles's most reliable representatives on the international stage, traveling to some of the most politically sensitive and symbolically important engagements that the monarchy undertakes. In 2025, Edward's schedule includes diplomatic visits to India, Canada, Papua New Guinea, and Japan, trips that require not merely showing up, but representing the crown with intelligence, sensitivity, and an understanding of Britain's complex global relationships. Charles does not assign such missions to people he does not trust. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, has emerged as a figure of particular moral authority. Her presence at the 30th anniversary commemorations of the Srebrenica genocide, where she read a personal message from King Charles to survivors and their families, was not a ceremonial duty. It was a recognition that she carries the kind of compassionate credibility that the monarchy needs in places where historical wounds are still raw and the presence of royalty must be earned, not assumed. Edward has also been confirmed to represent the king at the papal inauguration in Rome for Pope Leo XIV, a high-profile assignment that signals Charles's confidence in his younger brother at a moment when the senior working royals are stretched. Harry has left. Andrew lost his working royal status under circumstances that continue to haunt the institution. Charles himself has been managing a serious health situation that has limited his international schedule. William and Catherine are navigating the aftermath of the Princess of Wales's own health challenges. In this moment of institutional fragility, Edward and Sophie have quietly, reliably, and without drama stepped into the breach. The Duke of Edinburgh's award, the youth development program that Philip founded and that Edward has championed for decades, is the thread that connects all of this. Edward earned his own Gold Award in 1986. The following year, he became a UK trustee. He went on to chair the International Council for 17 years. He has traveled the world attending ceremonies, running programs, and personally advocating for young people in some of the most challenging circumstances on earth. His dedication to his father's greatest philanthropic legacy is not a talking point. It is a documented record of sustained years-long commitment to a cause that matters. Philip wanted his youngest son to carry his name for precisely this reason. Not because Edward was born to a title, not because inheritance entitled him to one, but because Edward had earned the right to it through work that Philip recognized and valued. The Duke of Edinburgh's award was Philip's gift to the world. And in Edward, he saw the person most qualified to ensure that gift endured. That recognition, according to those who knew Philip well, was at the heart of his wish, a wish that Charles ultimately honored, however reluctantly and however belatedly. Now, with his title confirmed, his property arrangements documented and legally established, and his role within the institution more central than it has been at any point in his life, Edward stands as something genuinely unexpected. He is no longer the forgotten youngest child, the butt of tabloid jokes, the prince who never quite found his footing. He is the backbone of a monarchy navigating one of the most difficult periods in its recent history. He holds a title his father wanted him to have. He holds a property arrangement that has stunned critics and lawyers alike. He holds the trust of a king who once withheld all of it. And his lawyers have confirmed every single detail. Whether you find his arrangements fair or troubling, whether you admire his patience or question the system that made it possible, the picture that emerges from these confirmed legal documents is one of extraordinary complexity. A family promise made in 1999, a title delayed for years, a property deal that generates private income from public land, a succession strategy that benefits generations yet to come, and at the center of it all, a man who waited, who worked, and who ultimately secured more than the headlines have bothered to explain. The royal family did not want this story told in full. Now that Edward's lawyers have confirmed what was always quietly in those documents, the full story is finally being told.